it's interesting because I feel like on the inside of the church, we're fighting this historical context you talk about. In other words, we love the blessing of the cross, but we don't love to sit in it and realize this is what God's asking me to do, to die to myself and to live for him, whatever context that's going to look like for me. But I want to flip that upside down, because I think the other side of it is true with our nation's history. We understand the curse that was slavery, white people do, and we say that was bad, but we miss the blessing of slavery, that it actually built up the framework for the world that white people live in and lived in. And so a lot of people call this white privilege, and when you say those two words, it just is like a fuse goes off for a lot of white people, because they don't want somebody telling them to check their privilege. And so I know that you and I both have struggled in these days with, hey, if the phrase is the trip up, let's get over the phrase and let's get down to the heart.
Sure.
Let's get down to what then do you want to call it? And I think maybe a great thing for me is to call it white blessing, that I'm living in the blessing of the curse that happened generationally that allowed me to grow up in Atlanta. And, you know, you talk about being 57.
Hello, family. Welcome to African Esquire TV. I'm your host, Tony Cherie. So this week, there were some interesting things that happened. The gospel artist Lecrae, if you haven't heard of Lecrae, he's basically a gospel hip-hop artist who's really known for having been vocal when it comes to issues of racism, but also receiving backlash for being vocal, because his fan base is basically a lot of young teenage white kids who might have not gone to school with a lot of black people, or certainly grew up in households where they do not want to discuss things like race or whatever, and they kind of live in this enigma where they feel like Christianity is condoning of racism and white supremacy. So him having that fan base, he's kind of known for someone who's trying to, I guess, raise awareness inside of the gospel arena, or the Christian, Christian genres about the issues of racism. So that's something he's known for. And he had a talk recently with some pastor, who's a white pastor who I've never heard of him before, but him and a CEO of Chick-fil-A. Now, it was interesting for a number of reasons, because a lot of things that were said were kind of like, you know, every once in a while you get white people to say things that are true to being how they actually feel. You know, because no matter what, most white people do feel how this pastor feels. Most of them do feel like they were blessed from slavery. Most of them do feel like they're blessed because of white supremacy or colonialism, as they should, because they control the resources, they control the power in the world, and so being honest, you know, they are inside of a position where we are not. They are in a position because of what they did. They are in a position because of what they continue to do. And so essentially this pastor slipped up and said his actual feelings, and, you know, he did an apology, but I think, you know, when people do these apologies, we have to understand, like, what the person said was how they actually feel. Now, your backlash might have created some regret, you know, and that person might want to dial back or try to reframe what they feel about certain things. But that person actually did say how they felt, in the beginning. And a lot of people feel that way, that slavery is a blessing, and it's not white privilege, it's white blessing. That's what he said. So, you know, there's a lot of things with that. First of all, with the phrase white privilege, I think I've said this before, I really don't like that phrase. I feel like it minimizes the total impact of global white supremacy. White supremacy being a system where Europeans came together hundreds of years ago at the Berlin Conference and said, we're going to control Africa, starting off, but we're also going to go into every single other place in the world, whether it be Asia, whether it be what's now Latin America. We're basically going to go into these places, and we're going to enforce on them our form of government for the benefit of our people, for the benefit of our countries, for the enrichment of our elite. So that is what white supremacy started as a plot, really, to control the world for white dominance, and it still exists today. So when I hear people say white privilege, of course they're going to be privileged. We're in their system right now. You know, capitalism, American capitalism, that's the system they created. So of course they are privileged. But to say white privilege instead of white supremacy, to me, kind of turns our sights away from the fact that this is not just a thing that happens where white people have the upper hand. This is an entire conspiracy against us, for them to control the narrative, for them to control the power, for them to control the money, for them to control everything. So that's just my little tidbit about white supremacy. But I say all that to say that, you know, a lot of people were upset that this pastor said that. And me being a Christian, I've said that a number of times on this channel, that I am someone of the Christian faith. I felt like I should offer a little perspective on what was going on in that room. So I like to think of Christianity as kind of having like two versions. So if you actually study Christianity, if you actually study the Bible, or, you know, and you don't have to be a Christian to study the Bible, but if you are someone who's done that, you're probably aware that what the church was prior to white people taking control of Christianity was very different than what it is today. So, for example, there was a lot of emphasis on taking care of the poor. Whereas today we see a lot of emphasis on self-enrichment, a lot of prosperity preachers, a lot of people saying, hey, get your financial blessing, pay this, and then, you know, God's going to bless you with this, you know, almost like, you know, God's just like this genie who's going to grant your wishes because you pay him a certain amount. That's kind of the sentiment that has arisen. But if you actually read the actual Bible, if anything, numerous scriptures condemn that type of mindset, that type of understanding of the world. So it's interesting that a lot of people call themselves Christian and they don't challenge the fact that what looks like Christianity today looks almost nothing like it did in the Bible. So when you look at the early church also, there was a lot of emphasis on things like taking care of your congregation. So a lot of people don't know this. The first church, it was really like everyone would give all of their money. It was literally like the extreme of socialism, in that all the church members would give the church all of their money, but the church took care of everyone. It wasn't just the church took care of the pastor. It wasn't just the church took care of the deacons or whatever. Every single person, basically all your needs were paid for by the church. So it's kind of like in modern context, they pay your rent, they pay for your cars, they pay for this, they pay for that. And it's not a thing as if the pastor has like an upper hand. It's like, it's basically the real ideal of socialism, being that, you know, the means of production, you know, the funds, the money, all those things are for the collective and not for individuals. But when you look at Christianity as it's practiced, what you understand is that that's very far from, you know, what was originally created. And instead, it's basically this idea that pastors are going to get paid off of the salaries of people who oftentimes are poor. And I'm speaking particularly for us in the Black community. A lot of our people are giving their money to churches, and those churches will not turn around and take care of them if something happens to them, if some type of catastrophe happens. You know, we've seen this, you know, with Joel Osteen's church in I think it's in Houston, when there was a hurricane that happened, and a lot of people were criticizing because, you know, okay, y'all closed the church doors, and there's literally a storm that's destroying, you know, our communities, and we don't have anywhere to go. You know, in that context of what the church was, there would be no second thought. You know, the church essentially was for the people. It was owned by the people. It was the people's church. It wasn't the pastor's church. And so we have to also understand that the historical transition, you know, as to what happened. And essentially where you get the second phase of Christianity, which is, I would say, the one that is literally praying to a white God, the one that's praying to a white Jesus, that phase of Christianity really came out of the conversion, first of all, of many Western Europeans to Christianity, and then them taking that Christianity that originally was for the poor, that originally was for the meek, that originally didn't even originate in Africa. So I don't know how y'all got or didn't originate in Europe. So I don't really know how y'all got a white looking Jesus, but they took that one and they manipulated it for the purpose of global domination, and that's what we see today. Today is literally like the grandchild of what happened back then. That being Christianity used as a weapon to colonize people. Christianity being enforced on people. Christianity being a slave religion. As much as people say that we're past that or things have changed, the truth is that a lot of the same mindsets still exist today. Case in point, I don't understand how a lot of people who say that they're Christians are comfortable with things like colonialism. I don't see how they're comfortable with white supremacy. I don't see how they're comfortable with the type of capitalism that is practiced in the United States. I don't see how they're comfortable with the wars that America has been launching, going whenever a country doesn't agree with them. They say, all right, we're going to go and basically bomb your country until you agree with us. I don't see how they're comfortable with any of those things. Yet somehow they've been comfortable with it because it's the same. It's a morphed version of the second phase of Christianity, being one for the purpose of white dominance, white supremacy, and for the subjugation of people who were not of European descent. So I just gave all that history to say what the pastor was saying was literally in the spirit of what that version, the Eurocentric version of Christianity, believes. And so that's why I started the video as to saying that's really what that type of belief system would justify. Because if the fact is, it's not just the sin of slavery. It's the sin of so many things after that. It's the sin of the prison industrial complex. It's the sin of colonialism. It's the sin of so many different things, of environmental racism, of exploiting people at work, like so many different things. And the fact is that those things are what the white society thrives off of. They are, as he said, that's their blessing. Our demise is their blessing. So, what he said, what he said to me was exactly what he meant. Unfortunately, I feel like there should have been more of a dissecting of what he said. Because as much as people want to run away from it now that they've seen so much backlash, I promise you that's a lot of people in the church who feel that exact same way. A lot of people who I know feel like that we were blessed because we were colonized, or we were blessed because we were enslaved. Like these ideologies that were taught to us by white oppressors. The idea that because we were taken to America, we now have civilization. We now can speak correctly. We now have, clean streets. These things that are told to us because we're told that Africa, as it exists, is essentially the fault of Africans. That's where we would be had they not colonized Africa. But although the truth is that had Africa not been colonized, it would have been a total reversal. Africa would not be the one that's a lot of times depicted as being poor or depicted as people who are starving. That would not be the case. That's something that is a direct result of what that pastor would say is a white blessing. The fact that white people control the commerce of the earth, that they control the resources of the earth. This is all a direct effect of that type of system. So, as far as the pastor, like I said, he said what he said and he meant what he said. To me, if you want to have an honest conversation, don't run from what you said. Talk about it, dissect it. Why do you feel that way? Why do you feel as though you something that literally was the destruction of a people is literally a blessing to your people? And I think if they actually thought through those things, then they'll actually come to a conclusion that would work for them and not against them. Now, I want to address Lecrae though. A lot of people went in on him, and as I said, he's someone that has to take a delicate balance. I personally don't feel called to make white people feel a certain way. I've never felt that. As far as, since, I've taken the steps to actually have a public platform, I've never felt like I had the calling to tell white people how not to be racist. It's not something I care for. That's something that he operates in, and for that, I will say that, he should probably have some some mercy, because I don't know how you do it, to be honest. That being said, he certainly should have been the one to call that pastor out. And I think that the issue is that when you're inside of certain positions, whenever you do say, okay, I'm going to make it my mission to try to get white people to do right or to be on board with the right thing, that puts you in the position of being in awkward conversations with them. And if you're not that person who's going to be vocal, if you're not that person that's going to call it out, if you're not that person who, to me, he should have really dissected when he said slavery is a blessing, or it's white blessing. He should have really dissected that. That would have been helpful to them, because frankly, every single notion of comfort with the policies of America, with the policies of capitalism, all those things should be questioned. To me, I don't see how you could be comfortable with those things if you believe in teachings that say that, the love of money is the root to all evil, or that it's easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. How do you feel so comfortable with these systems based off of capital, based off of exploitation, based off of an elite class who rules over everyone, and you don't feel like you have to speak against that? You don't think that the president, who is literally the epitome of that type of system, you don't think he should be called out for his greed or for the things that happen as a result of his greed? These are the things that should be discussed. How do you feel so comfortable as a Christian living in that system? How do you feel so comfortable not calling it out? And I will say, one last thing, this is to people who function in that mindset. Please understand that it is to your benefit, to not just live inside of this system, but to actually distance yourself from this system and to condemn this system, because slavery actually was a curse. Every single thing that might look like a blessing, it might look like a blessing from the beginning, but I promise you, when those things come back, as Malcolm said, when the chickens come home to roost, you're going to see what you thought was such a blessing is actually a curse. Some people really think that things are going to continue the way that they are, that the exploitation is just going to continue, that the death is going to continue, that all of these horrible things that happen as a result of white supremacy are going to continue, and the world's going to go on, and it's going to continue the same way. But I promise you, there's no way that it's going to keep on happening and that people are going to keep tolerating it. Literally, the world is being bled dry right now. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing revolutions everywhere. You're seeing people revolting because they're bled dry. A lot of these things, these sources have been tapped out, and there's no longer going to be an acceptance of this people, of these, I don't know, the Illuminati or whatever you want to call it, of these secret societies of Europeans who come together and have meetings, as they still do today. Don't think that they don't, all because it's not publicized. But there's no longer going to be a toleration of this. So I would say it's to your benefit. Again, I don't feel called to be that person to convince white people to stop being racist, but I would caution you that it is to your benefit to start being uncomfortable with these things. And black people who align themselves with white people in this system of white supremacy, it's to your benefit to call these things out. It's to your benefit to distance yourself from this system. It's to your benefit to be in a position where you're going to work against oppression and not work for oppression, because guess what? There's more oppressed than there is the people who are oppressing, and at some point your people are going to have enough, and you're going to have to answer the question as to what side you were on. And it's not just going to be you having to answer that question here on earth. You're going to also have to answer that question whenever you go and face your God. So be the one who's actually working for your own benefit. That's the funny thing. You think that when people are saying, you need to stop oppressing, you think that's just for our benefit. No, it's to your benefit. Because as Malcolm said, it's any means necessary. We're not the ones who determine what those means are. When you say any means necessary, if we can get our freedom peacefully, then we'll take our freedom peacefully. If we can get our freedom with no one having to be a casualty, that will be the ultimate solution, right? So it's not us who decides what's going to happen. It's not us who decides where things are going to go. It's the people who have power and are not willing to give up that power. When you don't respond to peaceful protests, for example, when you don't respond to things like sit-ins, and you only respond, it seems like they only responded, with the George Floyd situation, whenever they started seeing things lit on fire, whenever they started seeing police officers assaulted, and they proved themselves, wrong, because this idea that peaceful protest is what gets things done. I've been seeing peaceful protests all this time, and I haven't seen the same response that I see whenever I see people that are actually willing to put their lives at jeopardy and willing to die for a cause. And that's no coincidence. It's because the fact is that while they say that peaceful protest is enough, it's not enough. They're okay with it. They're okay with the traffic jams. What they're not okay is you threatening private property, you threatening their lives. So, you know, I say all this to say again that if you are that person who's in that position of privilege, if you are in that, or really, like I said, I hate privilege. If you are that person who is benefiting from this system, that's really what it is. Are you benefiting from the system of white supremacy, white or black? You need to be on the right side. I caution you to be on the right side, because some point it's going to tap out, and it's coming closer if you haven't been able to tell. So when that point happens, I would hope for you that you're not on the wrong side. So that's all I have to say on this, you guys. What are your thoughts? You know, I know, you know, I know this is something that is a real issue with the church, you know, and I'm always trying to speak life into that situation, knowing that there is a real issue with corruption in the church. There is a real issue with indifference to racial oppression, and that's something that has to be called out. So that's something I always try to call out on this channel, being someone who is a Christian. So what are your thoughts on what was said, what Lecrae didn't say? What are your thoughts on everything? I will see you guys in the next video.